Okay, so on our to-do list for our React project today, we're going to take a quick look at a bug fix from the last video where we kind of left off with a bug, and I think it took me a whopping 40 more seconds of looking at it to find the fix. So we'll look at that quickly. We're then going to, instead of waiting when the page loads, like right now we have a button to save students, and so we're not doing it on page load. Instead, we're populating our data on a button click. Well, we're kind of at a decent place now where we can show how to do that, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense now that we've been working with hooks for a little bit. We'll introduce our next hook to kind of see how that's done. We've been working with use state, and we'll work with one called use effect. And so bug fix, load data on page load. We're going to talk a little bit more about components, and we're going to refactor our code a little bit so that we can work with another component. Right now it's most of our code, or a lot of our code's in the app component, but we're going to refactor that a little bit. And then finally we're going to add the delete functionality. And so we got so far we have create when we insert a new student, we have read when we can search for a student. We're going to jump ahead and do delete because that's just slightly easier than update. And so we'll jump ahead and do delete, and then tomorrow or in the next video we'll do update. And so let's start from the bug fix. Now, what was happening yesterday was that our grad year, as soon as we started typing, it gave us a little warning. It wasn't an error, but the console gave us a warning. And what I noticed was that I didn't initialize my field to an empty string like I do with everything else. I either set it to a null or an empty string, and there you go. So had a little warning by changing grad year to an empty string. That fixed that warning. So that's our bug fix. We can check that off. Load data on page load with use effect. Well, what's happening right now is we call this function called save students, and we pass it some array of objects, and we call save students a couple different times, but basically when we click this button that says, hey, if there's no data in all students, then let's show this button. And then on click, we call save students, passing it the array of students that we have, that we declared up top right here. And so inside of save students, we set that to all students and to our search results. Instead of waiting on a button click, we'll just go ahead and get that on page load now. And so there's another effect called use effect, and in essence what we're going to use it for is to load data. And so you can load data from a database, you can load data from an array that you've coded in, as we've done right here, or you can load data from JavaScript cookies or local storage in JavaScript, which ultimately, kind of looking forward, we're going to work with local storage a little bit here. So saving our information to the user's hard drive. And so that's something we'll kind of have in the near future. But anyways, use effect they say is for side effects. Well, one side effect is loading data when the page loads. And so really what we need to do is use this hook and call this function and pass our data when the page loads. And so it's really not a terribly difficult function to call. So here's the use effect hook. Now inside of use effect we'll have a little arrow function looks something like this. And in here, we will call save students, passing it, passing it our array, which is just called students. And then there's a second parameter here, which is just an empty array. You can kind of read, it's a dependency list. If present, effect will only activate if the values in the list change. So basically, if there's any updates to all students, which there will be, then it will call this method. Now, equals arrow. There we go. And so now really what we should see when we load the page is our data just loads. And we really no longer need this button because the data should be there. So we should be able to comment out this line of code. And when we load the page, there's our data. So that was load data on page load using useEffect. We can check that off. Now the next line was refactor our cards into a component. Now what are our cards? You know, these are bootstrap cards that we are using to display every student. So here you can kind of see I'm inspecting my HTML and you see div class of card. And so every student is put into a column, and in that column there's a card. And here you can see that's what we're doing. Components are, you know, a major part of React, and so you want to break your logic up into small JavaScript files, and you call it a component. So here we have this add student component that we created, and we use this add student tag now, which is essentially working with a component. We created a new component called add student. I'm going to break up my displaying of the students, which is happening right here. Remember, we just looked at that HTML, all of my columns and all of my cards. I'm going to break this card up into its own component. And the reason being is that we've really got a bloated app.js. And so you really want to start extracting this into smaller components. And with this component that I'm going to create, we'll create just a student component, and it's going to display each student in a card. We'll be able to do more things with it, like delete students and update students. So in this new component, we have one component for adding. We'll make another component for displaying our students, as well as updating them and deleting them. All right, so ultimately here you can see this is using our search results, and here we got a little bit of logic for our card. Let's just start by creating a new file inside of source, which will be student.js. And student.js will start by importing useEffect, useState from React, and function student. Probably we're going to have props to send data back and forth, and then export default student. And inside of student, we'll have our return statement, which is going to return some JSX, which is, again, a combination of HTML and JavaScript. No curly there. There we go. And so I'm going to start by just cut and paste. Now, our student object, which is ultimately kind of being mapped out here. For each student, we're mapping the student. And you can see student.id is accessible inside of app.js, but it's not directly accessible inside of this component. And so what we need to do is we need to pass the student through a prop. And so we need to pass this student. So now let me show you how to do that. So we have a student tag, and we'll say student equals okay, student is not defined. Why? Well, we need to import it just as we did prior. We need to import student from student. So look at the student.js file, call it a student, and now we have access to the student object, which is in curlies, through the student prop that we have defined, that we have created in this student tag. Again, I think this can be a little cryptic. You could change the identifiers here, but these are ultimately three different things. This means there's a student.js file. This student is a property name that you're creating, and this student object comes from the student object that we're mapping. So these are three different things. Now we can say prop.student, and we get access to all of our fields.
Wouldn't it be props?
Thank you, props, plural. And same thing for student image. It's also worth noting that every, like the map, it needs a root element, and so there's one element that's the parent of everything else. So every time you have a map function, there needs to be a root element in the map. There also needs, every return has to have a root element. And so in this case, in my app, the root is the container, but in student, the root for each student is a card. Okay, now we're not really using the useState prop, but let's kind of go back here, and everything's functioning just the same. We've just refactored our code a little bit to have a new component, and we're going to be able to kind of use this component for deleting, which is still on our to-do list, and for updating. And so check that one off of the list. Refactor cards into a component. And this is looking like it's going to be a quick video compared to normal, because we're 13 minutes in and we've only got one bullet item left, which is to add the delete functionality. Now, just as in before, our data currently exists in these hooks right here. And so if we're going to update all students and update search results, you know, we need to delete from this file because these are where our hooks exist. And so we've got a function called save students, we got a function called add student, we got a function called search students. So let's make another function called delete students. Again, use effect, save, add, search. We'll just call it remove student. And presumably here we're going to take in a student to delete. Student to delete. And the logic for this is not super complex. It's actually using modern JavaScript. You can get it down to a one-liner. which is super nice. Let's get a delete button going on over here. Here we'll do a button type button, class name of button, button danger, button on click, and we need to call, ultimately we need to call the delete method here, which, just like before, we can pass individual pieces of data through props, but we can also pass methods through props. And so like we did with add student, wherever add student was, we passed this method through this property that we created. Let's go ahead and make a method called, or a prop called remove, and remove, what is it called, remove, and we're going to pass the function remove student, or in this case it's a variable that stores a function, but you get the idea. So through this remove prop we can call remove student, and if you want to be consistent you say remove student equals remove student, so that's fine. Ultimately down here then we can call props dot remove student. So when we click this button, we're going to call remove student. Now this remove student, going back, I forgot, you need to pass the individual student to delete. So because of that, we can't use this shorthand syntax. We have to pass an argument into that function. We have to go ahead and write the arrow function, and now we'll say props dot, what do I call it? Props dot remove student. And we have to send an individual student that they clicked on. So you pass the, this is kind of weird, but you send props dot student back. So you send an individual student into the component, and then the component, if you click the button, it sends that student back. Now just to make sure that this is looking at the right student, I'll do a console.table, and we'll print out student to delete. And so let's do a little testing here, and now all of our students have a big red button on it, and when I click delete student, it does in fact, I clicked on Celine here, does in fact contain his image or his information in a table. So you can see we're sending the data back and forth properly. And now we need to write the logic to actually delete a student. So we can log it, and that's fine. We'll go ahead and make an updated students array, set it equal to all students, and just like we used in our search, we used a filter. We're going to filter out the student where the student.id does not equal the student to deletes ID. Wait a minute. Yes. So student to delete is the entire student that we're going to delete, and we're basically going to filter out. Here's our condition. It says, does the student's ID that we're filter is going to be used to loop through every student. So we're going to go one student at a time, inspecting each student. And we're going to filter out, we're going to return true basically if the student's ID does not equal the student to delete ID. So basically all the students that that don't have that ID, we're going to keep in our updated students array. So filter out right. And so now that we have an updated students array, thankfully we already have a function that we wrote earlier called save students that's going to update set all students and set search results. So we're just going to call save students. We're just going to call this function down here. Save students, passing it the updated students array. I don't know that I explained line 67 clear enough. We have a new array of students where we're filtering out all students. We're putting a filter on it. And if the first students if that first student's ID does not match the student to delete ID, that would be true, and so that would return true for that student, therefore he would remain in the updated students array. Only when this is false and it does match, the IDs do match, this statement then becomes false because they are equal, and therefore that one student is filtered out. I think I did a little better job that second or third time I tried. If you stuck with me, I think you got it. Okay, and so we're calling this function, we're applying the filter. The filter is going to be used to return all the students that don't have that one particular ID. And let's go localhost. I wish I would stop. And there we go. And so here's Roxy. I can search by Roxy. I can delete. And there you have it. And it's working. Now, of course, every time you refresh the page, all the students come back, because every time you load the page, it runs that use state and reloads our data. So this delete is really not a permanent delete from that sense. They come right back on a page refresh. However, if this was in a more permanent storage, like in a database, the delete would need to come with a little bit more of a warning. Are you sure you want to delete this? Because deleting data is always very sensitive. You normally don't give end users the ability to delete things, right? Instead, you just don't show it, right? Instead of deleting, instead of deleting a student, if you were a ranking student and maybe you dropped out, you just might not show that student in the class, but you're not going to delete the record of the student. And there we go. So we can add, we can search, we can delete, and really what's left is the update, and that'll be one more video. And then after the update, we'll do some housekeeping and just kind of cleaning the final project up. And then deployment. At the end of the day, we're going to get all of our projects deployed onto Heroku and linked to from our portfolios.